Hi everyone, welcome back to the Watch Insider. My name is Brian, and thank you for logging on. We've got a great show tonight. I'm joined by Tim Mosso.
Howdy, folks.
And we've got a really large and really cool assortment of watches this evening.
I see we have Knoxville, Tennessee. We have Greg I in the box from Knoxville, and we've got Christopher P from Denmark. Getting late in Denmark. Christopher, thanks for sticking with us. Everyone joining in from far-flung, I appreciate. Brian, what are we starting with today?
Why don't we get started with the IWC I have here on the table, because it's a really interesting watch that we really haven't seen too many of. So here we have a Portuguese chronograph, but not just any Portuguese chronograph. This is the 150th anniversary Portuguese chrono with a blue lacquer dial, Arabic numbers, and for the first time on a Portuguese chrono, a sapphire crystal case back, which Tim will show you in just a moment here. So really beautifully executed watch. For this particular year, which was SIHH, not this year, but last year, IWC celebrated their 150th birthday, and pretty much all of the releases were done in either a white lacquer dial or a blue lacquer dial out of varying amounts of pieces. This, to me, was probably the best, most successful edition of all of them.
This is the classic. This is the all-time best-selling family of Portuguese watches. The original 3714 launched back in 1998, and it's a perfect size. It's a Portuguese that's not oversized. It's always ever been about 41 millimeters in diameter. The nice thing about this generation, it's not just that you get an in-house IWC caliber. That's nice and that's fun, but it's the lacquer dial, which was specifically designed to resemble the enamel dials of 1860s and 1870s IWC pocket watches. The dial features about a dozen different steps, including curing in an autoclave, so it is an entirely hand-finished component in and of itself, and probably the most appealing single feature of this 2,000-piece limited series. I'm going to throw it on the wrist for you. Okay, you guys know my Zinn EZM11, no introduction necessary, as they say. Now, the nice thing about this watch is that it is a wonderful size. The Portuguese family starts big and gets huge, but this one, by starting at 41 millimeters, allows everyone to play. It fits on my wrist. This would be my choice for case size. There have been some big ones and complications that have attracted me, but if I had to pick one for everyday use, I'd be hard-pressed to opt against this, especially since the dial's handmade, the movement's now in-house, and the style is a classic. Very little aesthetically has changed here from the well-traveled and effectively time-tested 3714, so I like this piece a good deal.
Yeah, and I think that it was a really nice transition that they did, transitioning to the new movement as well as the sapphire crystal case back with an addition of 2000 in a transitional year. I think they did a really nice job.
I was going to say,
these were predominantly sold all through the boutique network. I don't even believe that we got one as an AD.
One more dial shot, because I finally found my polishing cloth. There we go, guys. As you can see, it is just like enamel. The quality of that lacquer, 12 steps, most of which, in fact, are clear coating. This thing really does gleam. It's gloss, it's like wet paint, perpetually wet paint.
Alrighty,
piece.
So let's move to another blue dial piece from a completely different type of manufacturer. So here we have an H. Moser big date. We've got a blue to black fume dial, which is really what H. Moser has become famous for, is this technique that they do on the dial. You've got a bi-directional big date there, and I mean, again, not just a big date, that is a huge date window, which I think happens to be very, very cool. This is a 1 of 50. You've got a distressed brown strap. Tim will show you the back, and a 7-day power reserve. So, I think that when you start getting to a 5 to 7 day power reserve, if you're somebody that really doesn't like a manual wind watch, it gets a whole lot more interesting when you start getting to 5 to 7 days where you don't need to repeatedly wind it every 24 to 48 hours.
So, fans of the Tuesday show will recognize this familiar face, but you can't have too much of a good thing. Double-crested Côte de Genève. This is Moser caliber HMC 100 right here. 7-day power reserve nominally. It will run for 9. Now, if you look, you can see there's a case-back power reserve indicator, and if you look very closely, Harrison, let's see how close we can get to that balance. You might be able to see the solid 14-karat gold escape wheel and escape lever. That is what Moser makes in-house, even the small parts. Jumping to the case flank, you can see the hollows of the Venturer-style case, one of the real undersold, but potentially glorious selling points of Moser is that the case bands are never conventional, and you can see in between them vertical satin finish, a domed style sapphire that's almost like a vintage dive watch plexi. It's almost like its own biosphere, jumping right to the Fume dial. This one is actually known officially in Moser speak as Funky Blue. Their terminology, not mine. This is the Moser Venturer Big Date Purity. Purity because of the minimally adorned dial, and glorious for it. I'm going to throw it on the wrist.
Yeah, and I think that, more than ever before, it's increasingly difficult to do, it's increasingly difficult to do a very, very compelling time-only watch now. And and I think something like this comes along and they increase the size of the date window. They've got a beautifully laid out dial. The shape of the case, you can show it off a little bit, is sort of scalloped on the sides. That gives it almost a lighter impression on the wrist than it actually has. And just, overall, they've been doing really nice things.
White gold, 41.5 millimeters. This is a 2018 limited series of 50 pieces and a lovely one. The strap, as you can see, is a distressed simulated aged kudu. And if you know what a kudu is, good on you. I had to look it up. Open a different window.
How'd you know it was a
open up
kudu
Google.
strap? Does it say?
No, it's Moser. You got to know the secret handshake. I'm tight with Moser. This is a kudu strap. But yeah, so open up Wikipedia in a separate window, keep me streaming, and check out kudu. It's not a traditional calfskin, and it's very supple. A lovely piece.
Kudu.
That's kudu.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Welcome, Simon Holt from Hollywood, Northern Ireland. And I could see Flip and Zippo saying funky dial to be correct. Blaze and Mark joining in. I could see we've got Zeus87 saying you could show the Moser every day. I don't mind. And Thomas Burnett saying H. Moser and C make my favorite dials. Beautiful blues and browns. Matt Foster saying looks big on the wrist, no bezel, all dial. And that's despite being a 41.5.
Yeah,
it's about the same size as the
very
IWC.
nicely on the wrist.
Yeah, it's about the same size as the IWC I showed you. It's just all dial. It opens up.
And feel free, guys, please ask any questions that you may have about watches on the table or watches in general. We're here. We always like having a riveted discussion. Should we move along?
Yes. Suman Reddy joining from Melbourne, Australia, getting up early with us. Let's jump to a sports watch now.
Let's do the AP.
You want to do the AP?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a
sports watch.
This is a blast from the past here. So, here we have a 39mm Royal Oak GMT Power Reserve. So, awesome watch. I think that this watch was, it definitely didn't get as much fanfare as the Chrono when they were both being produced side by side. But nonetheless, a really nice watch, one that you don't see too often. They never did the Chrono in a black dial, which always disappointed me. You could only get this particular watch in the black dial or the time only. So at 39mm, sapphire crystal case back, it was actually the last of the 39s to remain in production. So they produced this watch with a black dial, silver dial, and blue dial. They then transitioned into a 39mm blue dial on a strap with a slightly different dial layout, and then the 39s were completely discontinued. So overall, just a really nice fitting watch. Me personally, I'm a bigger fan of the 39mm Royal Oaks than I am the 41s.
Also, nice thing about this watch, good old school JLC watchmaking on the inside. For much of the 20th century, JLC and Audemars Piguet owned parts of one another, so that's a time-tested relationship. In fact, the watch features a JLC movement turning the dual-time power reserve complication. Audemars Piguet making a solid upgrade to this mechanism in that you don't need a pusher adjuster to adjust the date as you do on the JLC version of it. So AP onward and upward. And because the JLC base is nice and slim, this one is considerably thinner, even with the modular complication, than the chronograph.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of these older 39 pieces. And it does not have a sapphire crystal case back. I apologize. The latest version of the watch does.
Okay, jumping into the box, we got Suman Reddy from Melbourne. Let's see who else is here from far flung. We have Tell me where you're from, guys. I always like to read off the roster. And I have a question, kudu antelope hide, basically. And Matt Foster saying, I like that dual time. Brick Lane saying, aging will be an issue with this AP. I'm not quite sure what he means by that. I think the Royal Oak has stood the test of time. I think that is now beyond dispute. I think we can render a verdict on that count. But anyway, I can see lots of friends join in from around the world. Let's talk about something completely off the beaten path. Since we're reprising,
Should we do the Belen Ross?
We could do the Belen Ross, yeah. This is very different from our usual FP Journe Love Fest.
So here we have a BR0394 Oralum. So Belen Ross, a brand that I really think does not get enough credit. I mean, they come out every single year with really interesting watches, compelling price points. They've got an interesting, unique look, and like we always talk about, it's hard to come out with a watch that from a distance you know exactly what it is. And most of the Belen Rosses you can see from a distance and know exactly what it is. And I still think that they're making great pieces. I still think that a watch like this does have a place in any watch collection. It's unique, it's different, it's sporty. You've got this like silvery metallic finish with this the bright luminescence on the dial, and this thing just is a beacon at night.
This is a great piece because the symmetry of the finish. It's sandblasted externally. The bezel is sandblasted, the dial is sandblasted, and if you look at the hand centers, if you get really close to the center of the dial, you can even see that the dial center features the same frosted style finish across the hands on their counterweights that you find on the dial itself. By the way, every hand on this watch, subdials, seconds, everything fully loomed. This is the Horolum, and it is well loomed. And it's also not a huge watch. My surprise when I actually shot my video of this is that it's only 12.5 millimeters thick, which is within 0.3 millimeters thickness of a Rolex Daytona. It's a 42 square, easy to wear, surprisingly wearable. I wouldn't have thought this would fit under a cuff, but it actually does.
Yeah, no, and I think that I'm a big fan of the smaller size, the 42. I think it fits me a lot better than the larger BR02. But I think that Belen Ross just gets a lot of flack from like guys that have gone deep in like watch game, where like they just similar to like Hublot, where they sort of just pass on it without really seeing the watches and trying them on and getting them a feel for them on the wrist.
Well, I would agree that most of the people who hate Belen Ross have probably never owned one or held one. That's generally the way it is. When you experience the world, you become a little bit more nuanced in your judgment of it. And I think Belen Ross has always been clear about what they do. They are a style house first and foremost. They're not Zinn, they're not Tutema. They're not trying to make a 3,000 meter dive watch that you wear with a straight face.
Correct.
They're fun watches.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. They look cool, they're fun, and it's not like they're coming out with fun watches at a $25,000 price point. They're coming out with fun watches for the most part at call it $3,000 to $6,000 that really are nice and wearable.
All right, we got Christopher G checking in from Portland, Oregon. We got Duncan Group. Duncan Group is Riley from Florida, so joining in from our old neck of the woods. We've got Askar from Zurich. We've got Sutat joining us. He's saying, greeting Earthlings, so I assume he's our one alien in the box. And we've got Lee Watkins from the UK and Stratford One joining us from Winterfell, which I've heard is wintering and has stopped burning. Big battle coming up, Game of Thrones this year. All right, jumping to our bump. Next watch on the table. Let's stick with the sports watch theme. Your choice.
Let's do the JLC.
Okay. This is a nice piece because it's wearable at 42 millimeters. That is the single most desirable feature of this rather rare master compressor diving Navy SEALs. Now, the Navy SEALs angle is either fabulous or absurd, depending on your viewpoint. Some folks are going to say they like the vaguely tactical aesthetic of this watch. Everyone can agree that the only branding is on the case back. So absent that Navy SEALs warfare device, this is just one of the coolest dive watches of the 2010s. It came out in 2010, and it's a lovely stainless steel 42. I'm going to throw this one on the wrist.
So this was actually my favorite of all the master compressors. Because to me, this was like, you could get this watch on a rubber strap. They had made it on a bracelet. You had this sort of like tactical-esque nylon leather strap as well that you could get with the watch. And it most closely resembled to me like a competitor for a Rolex sub. So I looked at it like if you had like three watches, like a Blancpain 50 Fathoms, a Rolex sub, and this watch, and you're just looking for something that's a little bit different, that's, you're not going to see very often. To me, this watch was like the it piece. And it wasn't as big as some of the other compressor watches. It was actually wearable for somebody with a smaller wrist.
I also like the fact that there's nothing retro about it. Oh, I take that back. It does use Polaris font for the numerals on the dial. That's it. Everything else about this watch was forward-looking, progressive, modern. It wasn't one of those re-edition rehashes where the company plagiarizes its own history, and JLC has been particularly guilty on that front as of late. Heck, for the last 10 years. This is one of the last few purely forward-looking sports watches to come from La Grande Maison, and I love it for that. Ceramic bezel insert, compressor crown that endows the watch with 300 meters of water resistance, 42 millimeters stainless steel, pretty slim at only around 13 millimeters thick. It's a good-looking piece, and it's a high-contrast dial, so
from a pure functional standpoint, it really can't get much better than that.
Yeah, so I mean, aesthetically speaking, with the ceramic crown, you've got a highly luminescent Arabic numerals, indices, and hands. And as far as the compressor crown goes, I mean, to be honest, I don't know how many guys are actually diving with this watch. And I understand the technology behind it. I really just think it's like one of those cool, quirky features that if your friends are into watches, it's like an interesting thing to show.
I would also say that, guys, if you know anyone who's in the SEALs and they are retiring, when they retire, this would be the ultimate sign-off for a 20-year retirement Navy SEAL. That would be one hell of a way to send that man into his golden age. You know, I say golden days, but guys retire from the SEALs when they're like in their 40s. So this is one hell of a retirement gift to a Navy
Try this bad
SEAL.
boy on.
Yeah, go for it. It's got a very stiff strap. That's one of JLC's chunkier strap.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing about it is it's an integrated strap. So if you have a smaller wrist, I think the rubber may fit slightly better.
Yeah, the rubber bellows strap.
But this definitely will break in. I think it's on a brand new strap here.
You know who owns that watch? David Bredin of A Block to Watch. He bought it on the full vulcanized stainless steel bracelet.
Oh, wow.
He bought it from us.
Awesome.
Okay, and then we got Dante Miami saying, I would prefer a 50 fathoms bathyscaphe. Well, for a 50 fathoms bathyscaphe, you were going to pay a lot more money. I would say that all things considered, that's one of the best blends of wearability. That is, it doesn't cost too much, and an actual lineage. It comes from a great house. Like, you're not going to find a Vacheron equivalent of that watch.
Correct. And like this is when I think pre-owned becomes really compelling, is that you can go back in time to a watch that's not made anymore, that's still relevant, that's really interesting, and is actually, obtainable.
Yeah, and I see Stephen Murphy saying, I'm retiring from the SEALs. Well, when they read the watch, get one of your buddies, get the whole unit to buy you that. That'd be cool. Let everyone put in a little bit of money, therefore it doesn't violate the gifting regs. Okay, let's jump maybe from a sports watch to a dress style watch. Why don't I show yours? Because yours changes from week to week.
Okay, we can show mine.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this piece.
So this is I've actually had it for a long time now, and I took it out from the drawer. So this is a Patek Phillipe 5065 Jumbo, 38 millimeters. Not the first Aquanaut they came out with. I believe it was in the second or third year of the variation. So self-winding automatic sapphire crystal case back, and I have on there a gray strap. So it's actually a ladies Luce strap, which happens to fit the model because the Luces of today are the same size as the Aquanauts of yesterday. So I have a whole bunch of different strap colors: blue, gray, green, you name it. And interestingly enough, it's a watch that was pretty unpopular until this year. Folks didn't really want the smaller size. It had an older look. Guys wanted that 40 millimeter Aquanaut with the integrated strap. And it was only probably, more recently that, this ability to change the straps to different colors caught on, and the watch grew in popularity.
And you can see beautiful caliber 315 automatic on the case back. A lovely piece, and still 120 meters water resistance, so a real sports watch. You guys know my Easy M11, so we're not going to go there. But what do you want to talk about next? We got a few pieces on the table.
Let's talk about the Journe, because we never talk about Journes on this show. So here we have, this is a watch that just came in. Happens to be one of my absolute favorites, and I think that it's probably one of the benchmark collectible FP Journes,
If you wonder what
that you can buy right now. If you were looking for like the sort of Grail status ultra collectible piece, that's like the one to have. It would be this. So here you have an early platinum resonance. You've got the gold dial. This is I want to say it's an 03 or an 04. I mean, again, I don't know what the case says there.
Yeah. This is actually probably an 03 based on the 2002 manufacture of the case. Brass movement, brass because it's rhodium plated, so what should be gold is actually silver. And you'll note it's not just that this is a brass movement resonance. The original resonance featured a visible crown wheel and twin ratchet wheels with twin clicks. So when you look at the gold version of this movement, you just see the center of the pivot jewel for the arbors of the barrels. You don't actually see the ratchet wheels, so it's not just a different material and a different look, it's an entirely different barrel bridge architecture. Now if you look at it at center, you can see there's actually a rack and a pinion system. I'll try to show this to best advantage, and that golden screw at the center is used to move the far balance in and out. So you move it relative to this primary balance, and you get that perfect spacing to the point where they start to mutually interfere. And it's a very salutary interference. If one speeds up, the parasitic losses from the other resonate outward and actually create the same effect you would get with a pendulum. When you start pendulums from metronomes in proximity to each other, the parasitic losses actually radiate out and they begin to resonate with each other, so they will mutually slow or speed up to stay synchronized. And it can keep the watch synchronized so that there is no more drift than about 5 seconds between the two separate escapements and the two separate drivetrains of the watch over the course of 24 hours. And you can see you have two dials. They can be set independently, and once it takes about 5 to 10 minutes for the resonance effect to take purchase, so the seconds hand might not be synchronized, so you just pull the synchronization crown down at 4 o'clock, and that's how you get them in sync. The power reserve will go from 40 to 0 as you wind it. It's one of those quirky Journe power reserves that actually shows you how many hours since you last wound the watch. Now, of course, the brass movement was discontinued mid-2004, so these would have been made during a relatively narrow window from late 2000 to mid-2004.
Correct. So, and what's so interesting about the gold dial watches is that these dial colors were the very first pieces that he was creating when he started the brand. And these dial colors were discontinued when they transitioned into the rose gold movements, because Francois Paul thought that the gold, the yellow gold of the dial clashed against the rose gold of the movement and just didn't go with each other. And as a result, you don't see gold dials on any of his watches anymore. So these dials are, they're synonymous with his older pieces. They haven't been available in, 15 years. And as far as a collectability standpoint goes, I think that these are the types of watches that if you're looking to have that benchmark Journe, you've got a resonance, you've got a gold dial. The only other watch that I would say is probably comparable to this would be the gold dial tourbillon.
Yeah, I would say realistically, any tourbillon remontoir from the first series, that would be a highly collectible piece. If you wanted your anchor Journe watches, you'd get a resonance one, a tourbillon remontoir, and
an RDM, maybe a Reserve de Marche, an early one. I really like.
Yeah, I would say you have to have an Octa in there, certainly. You'd have to have one of the automatics. But then you'd really want to have something like a CS, a Chronomètre Souverain, or a Chronomètre Bleu.
Love it when you have that French lilt on there.
I got my accent down. It's the rest of the language that troubles me.
Okay. So guys, please keep the questions coming. I think we've got time for one more watch. Why don't we do the BMG Tech?
Yeah, okay.
So Tim will explain a little bit about this watch. This is a watch that when they first came out with it was actually quite difficult for Panerai to deliver. They let out very few. We're starting now to see a few more. You've got a BMG Tech submersible with a bright blue dial, blue rubber strap, and Tim will talk a little bit more about why this watch is so special.
Yeah, 47 millimeters in BMG alloy. We'll talk about what that is. It's a big Luminor submersible 1950. We first saw this watch at SIHH in 2017, and it felt like we didn't see it again for another year. It's extraordinary on a couple of levels. First is the material itself, which is an alloy of aluminum, nickel, titanium, zirconium, and copper. And it's difficult to see in isolation, but it's easier to see in relation to the case back. There is a very different hue and tone to this main metal that comprises the case, the bezel, as well as the crown guard. It's almost like titanium, but with a little bit of a red or underlying yellow tone. Now the dial is a luscious gloss blue like you would see on an extravagant Rolex white gold Submariner Smurf, and that is an unusual look for Panerai. The advantage of the BMG Tech is clear. It's lighter than steel, I can tell you that because in the hand it's lighter than steel, and it's also very scratch resistant because the actual molecular structure of it is a little bit chaotic and unaligned. It doesn't have the vaguely crystalline order that you normally get on metals. It's actually flash frozen after it's cast into this form, so you get a lot of scratch resistance, shot shock resistance, dent resistance, and a much lighter overall watch because of the alloy composition. It's a big piece too. At 47 millimeters, I'm not gonna lie. The look is huge. It's the diving equivalent of an IWC Big Pilot and almost as broad across the wrist, but it's not terribly thick. 3-day automatic movement, it's only 15 millimeters thick. It's a timepiece that stretched Panerai to the breaking point, and that's really something when you consider the Panerai has done ceramic, titanium, steel, gold, platinum. It's even done composite alloys. So this is a very interesting metal. It looks different, it feels different, and qualitatively, because it is so scratch resistant, it works differently too. One last thing about the dial, it has bigger indices than previous submersibles. So if you compare this to something like a 305, it is easier to see by day, it's easier to see by night. That's the BMG Tech PAM 692.
So, and how do you think it polishes? Like, do you think that you can polish it with normal techniques, or do you think it has, it would have to go back to the brand?
I would rather it go back to the brand. That's always my preference. I would say realistically...
Probably polishes like steel, don't you think?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. If it's very hard, it might have a tendency to chip or pit. So
that's one of the downfalls of ceramic, obviously. Yeah. Again, on something like this is that if you scratch it or do anything to it, it just can't be.
It has.
Polished
I
out.
think it could be, but I would do it factory. It probably requires tools that will not wear down on it. It has a very high percentage of zirconium in the alloy. So my thought is a conventional finisher would not want to wear out his tools on that. I would leave it to the factory because they have the equipment and they've probably done it before. I would say just unless you dent it or something. Don't do any refinishing.
Yeah,
just leave it as is.
We always recommend to just,
it's a Panerai.
Live with it.
And since we're doing watches from last night, let's do one more. This is a treat for you guys who love complications.
You've been wanting to talk about this watch all night.
I love
every
this.
time you would go and reach for it, I would say one of the other ones just to get to you.
The reason is because this is not a watch we own. So here's a watch that I love. I can't be bought, I can be charmed. This is the Reservoir Cars Series Supercharged Classic. It's designed to look like a vintage instrument, so a tachometer or a speedometer from a 60s car. The nice thing about it is it's actually a Swiss-made watch with a module by Telos SA. Those are the people who made the Harry Winston Opus 14. And the module gives it a power reserve, a jump hour, and a retrograde. And it works beautifully. Let me show you just how this thing works because it's a hell of a lot of fun. This is like instant gratification if you love retrogrades. They're usually dates, which I hate because you're never watching in the middle of the night on the 31st when the date retrogrades. Here, you can just play with this thing all day, and even has a patent so you can't accidentally damage it and turn it backwards. Every time you jump the hour, it's like a little piece of horological theater. And then there's the power reserve down at the bottom. So you get a retrograde, a jump hour, and a power reserve all in an automatic watch. And again, the module is designed by Telos and the watch is made in La Chaux de Fonds. So it has an impressive pedigree for a thing from a brand that's only 2 years old. It's a French brand like Belen Ross. It's a French brand. They design in France. They build in Switzerland. Again, kind of like Belen Ross. I'm a big fan of that thing. 43 millimeters. It sells for under $4,000. And on top of that, they give you a 3-year warranty. Patek.
Okay.
That's a fun piece. By the way, they have another one called the Longbridge British Racing Green that was a GPHG nominee this past year. All right. I think, guys, we have run our course.
We have. We got through a lot of watches tonight.
Big night on the table.
And as always, guys, please feel free. If there's any watches that you want brought onto the show, just email myself or Tim, and we will make sure that we bring them along. Peruse the website, and if there's something that's interesting that you'd want to see live and you'd want us to talk about live, we're always happy to do so.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Time
you.
out, Tim out.
I am Brian.
I'm Tim.
And thank you guys for logging on.
Good job.